Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you all very much indeed for joining us here in the Liver building. My name's Nick Lambert. I'm your chair for the next couple of days. And I can't tell you what a privilege it is to be in the Liver building. And we were just saying, and after this major international event, there's some singing event taking place. So everybody's going to come to Liverpool afterwards, after this amazing event we're going to run over the next couple of days. Thank you for coming in on time. I've got to pay Sally £10 because I said she wouldn't get you all in here by 9:15. So I've already lost my first bet of the day. I'm going to start with the usual domestics. Please, if you could put your mobiles to silent while we're here in plenary sessions, that would be very helpful. There are no fire drills, so in the event that the alarm goes off, we're straight down the stairs and outside, and there's a car park just to the northern side of the building where we'll gather. Please don't use the lifts. Slido, please do feel free to download the Slido app. The password is Coastlink, which keeps it nice and simple. It does work. I made it work, so if I can do it, you can definitely all do it. You can put your questions on there, but I'm a bit old-fashioned, as you can see. I'm a certain age, and it's really great to talk to people. So if you feel brave enough to ask a question, then please do. I'd much rather have a human interaction, and after a while I get bored of Slido questions, so I'll come and demand a question from you. I'm going to start by making some thank yous. Really big thank you to Peel Port's group, Stephen Carr, who's been fantastic in supporting setting up this event, and of course the Port of Liverpool, and our partner organisation, Port of Antwerp Bruges. And of course we follow on from last year's Coastlink 22 in Antwerp, which was a fantastic face-to-face event the first face-to-face event in the aftermath of the pandemic, and we have put a huge amount of effort. I particularly highlight the effort that Sally and Stephen have put into pulling through the themes from last year, as we said we would, with a determination to drive them through into themes for next year. And you'll see that tomorrow afternoon we've fitted in a workshop which we would love you all to participate in. It's going to be quick and dirty, identifying challenges, where we need those challenges, we need guidance from government to tackle those challenges, and where industry can give leadership to them. And we are determined that that will go into some form of paper, which we will take to suitable government and institutional organisations to say, we have brought all these clever people into one place over a couple of years, and here are some of our findings. Here are some of the things that we need to unlock. Please help. I mustn't also forget to mention our supporting partner associations and their support for this event. So Logistics UK, the British Ports Association, the Institute of Chartered Shipbrokers, the Workshop Group. In the event that I've missed somebody, please do give me a firm prod in the eye at coffee, and I will do something about addressing it. I'm going to make a couple of remarks just as scene setters before I hand over to Claudio to make some opening remarks, just to give you food for thought. So I've already mentioned the pandemic. That's history now, isn't it? My wife went for another inoculation yesterday and decided it wasn't a good idea and came home. We seem to have got over that one, and apart from some political fallout, we've navigated around it. Brexit, we've managed our way around the mess that we Brits created, and we were just talking a little bit earlier about what is normalcy in shipping and logistics. Actually, it's a fluid normalcy. It keeps adjusting. It adjusts to events. And of course, the really big scene that's running at the moment is Ukraine. That has definitely highlighted our global logistics network. No matter how much nationality kicks in, there are still global links there, and the whole grain story, the rising price of oil and so on, which may be stabilizing, maybe not. But that definitely has highlighted the importance of global logistics and how we tighten them up. I personally despair, I'm sure everybody despairs at Ukraine, but I particularly despair at it because it's masking the much, much bigger message around climate change. And I don't know how much you've been reading the press recently, but you'll have seen that scientists are increasingly concerned about a massive spike in rising sea level temperatures. And that is driving sea level rise. So as we think about zero emissions and reduced carbon activities, we've got to bear in mind that we've already locked in, thanks to the current rising temperatures, we've locked in at least 3 meters of sea level rise. And you can think about that in the context of Coastlink, so with the emphasis on coast. That's not 3 meters out in the ocean, that's 3 meters on the coast. So we're either going to get more navigable sea space than we planned, or we're going to see some interesting activities over the course of the next 30 years as we drive towards zero carbon targets. But that sea level rise is already locked in and it's happening. So it's a very, very interesting challenge. And the question is, how do we manage it? How do we seize the opportunity that lies behind it? And how do we build it into the increase in offshore infrastructure for offshore wind and so on? So it's a really, really fascinating tapestry. I think I'll shut up at that stage. So it's now my pleasure to introduce the Chief Executive of Peel Ports Group, Claudio Veritiero. Did I get that right? Claudio, thank you very much indeed for coming to speak to us. Very good to see you.
Thanks, Nick. Good morning, everyone. I'm, as Nick says, Claudio Veritiero, the Chief Executive of Peel Ports Group. On behalf of the team at Peel Ports, I'm delighted to welcome you all to Liverpool and to the Coastlink conference over these next couple of days. We're very honoured to host this year's event and to welcome such a diverse variety of colleagues from across the industry and indeed across Europe. This important conference brings together a key network of businesses and professionals to discuss the challenges, the opportunities, the trends and the issues that we all collectively face in the short sea feeder and intermodal transport markets. This year's conference theme on growing and developing sustainable supply chains reflects the important and urgent, as Nick's just outlined, need to deliver greater efficiencies and improvements which support our customers whilst having a positive impact on people, places and planet. The last few years have thrown many challenges into the mix for our sector, from the pandemic to the global supply chain crisis, the devastating war in Ukraine, and latterly the social and industrial unrest that we're seeing in various parts of the world against that backdrop of soaring inflation and an economic downturn. It's clear that the only constant that we can all expect is the need to change, to adapt, to learn, to strengthen our businesses, to drive resilience across our broader industry. An industry which is prepared for whatever next comes our way. As an industry, we've got a critical role to play in developing better infrastructure and projects which have a positive impact for the future and for generations to come. And when I look at the agenda for the next 2 days, I see many opportunities for us to learn from each other, to explore new opportunities and to identify those actions that we can take now which will deliver better outcomes in years to come. So here at the Port of Liverpool and across the wider Peel Ports Group, we've made a strategic decision to align and develop our commercial objectives with our ESG programme, reflecting the importance and critical emphasis that we place on ensuring that we grow our business responsibly and sustainably for the long term. We're working at speed to implement positive changes, not least in our pursuit of being a net zero port operator by 2040. That's 10 years ahead of the UK government's target. Our van fleet, for example, is now almost 100% electrically powered. Our plant and equipment is now fueled by HVO, and we're increasing the amount of renewable energy that we use and, importantly, that we generate. But it isn't just about setting goals, it's about getting on with achieving them too. And this isn't really about just about being a good business, it's good for business. For those of you that visited the city and the Port of Liverpool during the last Coastlink conference here, I think hosted about 10 years ago, you may notice one or two small changes, and that's aside from how much Stephen Carr has aged, of course. If you made it onto the port tour last time round, it'll be a great game of spot the difference if you're making the port tour tomorrow. Hopefully, you'll see the best part of £1 billion that's been invested into the facilities in that time. Regenerating the infrastructure, transforming the prospects for the port, creating jobs, driving regional economic growth. In 2016, we launched the Liverpool 2 container terminal, a £400 million investment in a new deep sea container terminal, which has been a game changer for us as a business, but also for the UK, improving cargo flows and supply chains and supporting the vast network of businesses who work in or are reliant on the efficient import and export of goods. With an on-site rail terminal offering 4 daily services, Liverpool can now move goods into the West and East Midlands, as well as north to Glasgow, better connecting our port to the national network. And Stephen perhaps will talk about some of the investment we see on the rail side in more detail tomorrow. When you're on that tour of the dock system tomorrow, you'll also see the new warehousing, the new haulage depots, all of which is ensuring that there's sufficient capacity in landside transport and storage and even e-fulfillment, meaning that goods can go from the container to the parcel carrier before leaving the port estate. All put together with the addition of our own short sea service through BG Freightline and our logistics division, Peel Ports Logistics, we can offer customers a complete end-to-end service with intermodal options offering efficient and sustainable movement of goods. So the Port of Liverpool's proximity to 35 million consumers and major distribution centres at the heart of Britain's industry means that those seeking to lessen their environmental impacts, or the environmental impact rather of their supply chains, have open access to an unparalleled gateway of choice into and out of the UK. But that's just our container business. Liverpool, accompanied by the Manchester Ship Canal, handles one of the most diverse range of commodities of any UK port, given our proximity to so much of the UK's industrial base. Industry partnerships are fundamental for achieving this at the Port of Liverpool, as they are across all of our sites. And these are underpinned by investments which enable the development of sustainable supply chains and support our customers and partners in their efforts to achieve greater efficiencies with better, more sustainable outputs. An example of this is our recent partnership with the automotive OEM Stellantis and their logistics provider Swardias in launching the Green Automotive Hub. This hub on the QE2 dock at Eastham, just over the other side of the Mersey, I think pointing that way, says he, just over on the other side of the Mersey, enables a ro-ro service between Spain and the Mersey, and represents a joint £10 million investment to support the supply of parts for Stellantis' Vauxhall plant at Ellesmere Port. This manufacturing plant has been transformed to exclusively produce electric battery models for the commercial vehicle brands across the Stellantis portfolio. And our collaboration means that there'll be less than 2 miles of surface transport between ship and manufacturing hub. So not only is this collaboration supporting a major manufacturer in its transition to developing electric vehicles, it's also ensuring that the supply chain for the necessary vehicle parts is environmentally responsible, as it will remove an estimated 15,000 lorry journeys off the roads across the UK and continental Europe annually, saving a projected 30% in CO2 emissions and 37% in energy consumption when compared to road travel. So this represents just one example of our move to enable a greener supply chain by collaborating with like-minded businesses as we commit to reducing carbon emissions and our collective impact on the environment. Our own industry-leading commitment to be carbon neutral by 2040 across all of our operations in the UK and Ireland is a driving force for investments, partnerships, and the future growth of our business. This is especially important as today, the Liverpool and Mersey cluster, together with our other ports of Heysham in the northwest, London Medway and Great Yarmouth in the southeast, the Dublin Container Terminal in Ireland, and Clyde Port in Western Scotland handle up to 70 million tonnes of cargo each year. Our recent acquisition of the Humber Bulk Terminal has given us an enhanced footprint on the east coast of England, and our Peel Ports logistics team is already making investments in the site to develop and grow our bulk business in key industries like agriculture, construction and energy. The transition to renewable energy will rightly be a key feature in this year's conference programme. I'm certain that this will spark some interesting debate and discussion as we all rise to the challenge of decarbonising our businesses whilst exploring commercial opportunities on the global road to net zero. In thinking about how we can help that journey to net zero, I'd encourage you to also think about the many challenges aimed at decarbonising shipping, such as CII and the EU's extension of emissions trading to the shipping industry, and whether the UK government or the EU are doing enough to ensure that the intermodal playing field isn't distorted as a result. So I hope you'll enjoy the technical tour of the Port of Liverpool tomorrow, where hopefully you'll learn and see firsthand much of the work being done to develop many innovative and sustainable projects, and the investments that we're making in our infrastructure and assets, and the future plans to enhance the capability and the resilience of our operations and the supply chain that hangs off it. Coastlink will undoubtedly provide valuable time and space to share knowledge and ideas, to collaborate and explore future opportunities, and to, of course, network with colleagues and peers around our wider industry. I hope you'll take some time to enjoy the social element of the conference and take in the warmth and charisma of the people and the city of Liverpool, famed, of course, for its maritime heritage, its sport, and of course its music. The city is of course honoured even to be hosting Eurovision next week on behalf of the people of Ukraine. Now, just be careful that the Peel Ports team don't encourage you to get the karaoke mics out at dinner tonight, because the stage is only across the way. But that encouragement to to take in the cultural and the maritime heritage of this great city leads me to one last thought. Often we're asked about the Port of Liverpool, how far off we are against the historical heyday. A city, a port with a great, heritage in the rise of the trading beast that was the UK. Well, if your measure is tonnage, our record year, when the port saw more tonnes than ever before, was 2021, beating the previous record set in 2019. It's a growth of around 5% from where the port was a decade ago. One of only 2 of the top 10 UK ports to have grown in that period, and even more spectacular when you realise that volumes through UK ports fell by 14% over that same period. So +5 versus -14, as a result of the first chapter of the UK's energy transition. The story and the strategy you heard from us a decade ago is now delivering the results we wanted. Let's hope that we can all meet up in another decade's time to celebrate the successful transition of our industry to a cleaner future, while still benefiting from economic prosperity and growth. I sincerely hope you enjoy the conference and enjoy Liverpool even more so. Thank you.
afraid speakers will find that they don't get away without answering a question. Claudia, thank you very much indeed for a really interesting introduction. You gave some very big numbers there, 1 billion, 400 million, 70 million. How easy is it to spend 1 billion? How easy is it to manage the spend of 1 billion and to grow a port? And I say a port where you're actually talking about a region in the way that you were describing. And how you mentioned a decade in your last sentence or two. How easy is it to see the performance of that investment over time and to know that you've done a good job?
So look, I think anybody can write the checks if you've got access to the funds. The challenges ultimately are about finding the right projects with the right customers and the right access to markets. If you take that expenditure, more than half of it has been customer backed. So projects where we know the end market, we've got the supply chain lined up, and you can therefore essentially de-risk the delivery of that return on investment. Something like L2 is a speculative development. You can only take the decision to make that investment if you can make a 30, 40, 50-year call on the market. And to do that, you've got to earn that backing through that consistent performance of the business. We've been fortunate, like many of our UK peers, to have the backing of pension funds as shareholders. They're able to take a much longer term view than a typical institutional investor might take in, say, a PLC or a pure private equity environment. And that's meant that we've been able to paint that picture, build that story, and talk very much about what's going on with cargo flows, not over a 1, 2, 3 year period, but over a 20, 30, 40 year period. When you then bring that back to the sustainability, the net zero journey, for me, that approach and that burning issue, that is the journey to net zero, go hand in glove because the timeframes are not that dissimilar.
And you don't always get the chief executive of the board, so I'm going to ask another question. Could you just reflect on relationship with government and in the broadest terms and big institutions like IMO? Do you feel that you're able to, as industry, you're able to give leadership and to crack on and make things happen within a governmental sort of framework? Or are there some real challenges in there that government just doesn't get and doesn't address?
Look, I think at a first level, what I would say is we're fortunate in the UK to have a model compared to a number of areas, other areas of UK infrastructure, where we're relatively deregulated. Now, I know it might not seem to be the case sometimes when you've got, for example, post the P&O issues or, the Russian shipping crisis off the back of the Ukraine, new legislation coming in and sort of, imposing new rules on the industry. But when I look at having worked, in a previous life in the construction sector, and I look at some of the regulation around, energy generation, utilities, water, and so on and so forth, where, how much you spend on CapEx is determined by how well you perform on the ground, the amount of consumer protection that's there. I think actually, as an industry, it works, and government, I think, has taken a generally, relatively hands-off approach. There are some areas that I think we could do with a little bit more help. I think the role of ports within those sort of regional economies and how you facilitate that, whether it's transport links in particular, port connectivity would be the key area that I think we need to work more on government, and government could do more around. I think the other area which brings in, I think, more of the international organisations, probably around the, I think at the moment I see quite a disjointed approach to the various interventions that are about decarbonising. I alluded to some. You've got, CII didn't really have an awful lot of teeth. We've now got EU emissions trading. That's all great. It drives carbon down in shipping, but it takes no account of what happens once the cargoes are on dry land. And for me, we've got to get across these organisations much more of an end-to-end view of the, the carbon involved in getting a cargo from the factory gate to the, the shed that's going to distribute it.
Brilliant. Thank you, Claudia. You can hear Felicity crashing out notes there. We've captured those and they'll help us for the workshop tomorrow afternoon. Thank you so much for speaking to us. Thank you for the support of Peel Ports Group. I have to give you a gift. I think you're flying this afternoon. I'm told you need to make sure it goes through the scanner.
Thank you.
Thanks ever so much, Claudia.
Thanks
That's
very
brilliant.
much.
Thanks, Claudia. Right, ladies and gentlemen, our keynote presentation now is by Roger McGann. Roger, please come and take a place. He's the Managing Director of WEC Lines UK Limited. Thanks for giving us your time. Roger, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning and welcome to Coastlink. Welcome to Liverpool. Thank you for attending. As been mentioned already, there's another large event happening in Liverpool next week. So everyone's got mixed up and is expecting me to sing. You would be sadly disappointed. Right, let me just... Okay, if you go to the next slide, please. This is my first Coastlink conference, so just to give a little bit about myself and who I am. So Roger McGann, Managing Director of WEC Lines UK. WEC Lines started in the UK in earnest in its own right in 2019. I'm native to the city of Liverpool, this great maritime city, and I'm very proud of that. It's an absolute privilege to be here today speaking at such an iconic location as the Liver Buildings, home of the mythical Liver birds. Two birds, one looking inland, one looking seaward. They're said to protect both the city and the ships and sailors arriving and leaving from the great port of Liverpool. Like many families in the Liverpool area, the port and surrounding industry supported my family with jobs, grandfather, father, uncles, all working in or around the docks or local industries. So maybe it's in my blood that I'm also in the industry. I've worked for over 3 decades in the industry, in freight forwarding, shipping lines, ACL, Yang Ming, CSAV. However, it was when working for the Port of Liverpool that I was able to see the wider picture and the importance of bringing cargo closer to the local market and the benefits that has on the supply chain and decarbonisation of supply chains. And it's something I continue to champion today through WEC Lines. I also have the pleasure of working in Felixstowe, which is where WEC Lines is headquartered in the UK, which is the largest container port in the country. If you could go to the next slide, please.
You should be able to use the version.
Oh, okay. So, short sea, defined as maritime transport of goods over short distances. However, it's more complicated than that. As a short sea operator, we are much more than operators of vessels between ports. We are door-to-door operators, which means in addition to ships and networks, we're providing end-to-end solutions. Regular dedicated block train connections in Spain, for example. Container trucking, delivery and collection, using barges, mainly on the continent. Cross-docking, so de-stuffing and stuffing of containers local to the port or in the port. Warehousing, and then delivery on curtain-side or flatbed vehicles. WEC Short Sea Network, we operate 15 vessels between 60 TEU and 1100 TEU. And for us, what's really important in the Short Sea Network is quick transit times, high frequency, fixed day departure and arrival, prompt movement through customs, and fast final mile delivery. And this requires all the parts of the network and the supply chain to be working in unison: vessels, ports, rail, haulage and warehousing. Today's programme, Session 1 got market sector overview, the new normal. Session 2, how to promote growth and deliver resilient end-to-end supply chains. In order to help us navigate this simple yet complicated market, the Coastlink team put together a fantastic panel of speakers today. Collectively, they have many years of in-depth knowledge and experience, such as Mike Garrett from MDS Transmodal, Michael Ross-Kilby Lind, I hope I said that correctly, commercial manager of the Port of Aalborg. There'll be a Q&A session at 10:20, so please, as Nick said, please engage with questions, sort of with the speakers. We'll get this right at some point. So one of the questions that the Coastlink team presented was, are the market trends normal? And in the short answer to that is yes, they are. But the question is why and what happens next? And following Brexit and the pandemic, it's widely accepted that in the short sea markets, the challenges of congestion at the ports, inland terminals, haulier and driver availability, warehousing availability and staff levels have largely receded. And the supply chain is free from the major constraints of the last few years. What is hard to determine or measure right now is how resilient the links to the supply chain will be when the deep sea volumes return in quarter 3, quarter 4 this year, as they're predicted to do. I definitely won't get this right. Some of the influences and trends in the market today. There's a glut of new tonnage coming, and often this is accompanied by cascading of tonnage onto smaller trades, which could place downward pressure on rates at the time when costs are actually increasing. The potential development could favour the shipper. However, as we've seen in the past few years, when markets rebound from shock, they tend to overreact the other way. We have recession looming, or still a spectre on the horizon anyway. And although the UK is predicted to avoid recession in 2023, the economy is forecasted to shrink, which could in turn lower demand for goods later on in the year. We have new regulations coming into force as the industry looks to decarbonise, IMO 2023, and other rules come into play. Shipping lines will have to meet new criteria under IMO's Carbon Industry Index, CII, and the European Union's Trading Emissions Trading Scheme, ETS. Under CII, each vessel will have to report its annual efficiency ratio, AER, and will be graded in terms of compliance. WEC has a roadmap to be carbon-free, net zero emissions by 2050. The next question that was posed by the Coastlink team was, what are the emerging opportunities? Greener, more sustainable supply chains. Consumers basically are demanding more transparency from the supply chain, not just where their goods are coming from, but how they're arriving at markets, and is that supply chain sustainable? The last few years have seen much uncertainty in supply chains. However, for the short sea market, sort of just in case model is coming back as opposed to the just in time model for the previous years. So companies are starting to hold a little bit more stock, so that could see our volume sort of moving and supply chains in the short sea getting busier. Short sea can still take advantage of regional ports where the current infrastructure cannot accommodate the larger vessels on the global trades. Short sea is still to access these ports and get closer to the final destination. This also creates opportunity for deep sea lines to increase feeding from main ports to regional ports as well. There's deep sea, slower steaming, increased feed opportunities, sort of on top of what we're doing. There's a model shift and best routing options, and we can see here that the diagram says that, moving by sea is still one of the lowest CO2 emissions that we can possibly achieve. So thank you for listening. It's been my pleasure to speak to you today, and I hope to have some great questions during the sessions that follow.
Roger, thank you very much indeed. The way we're going to work this, just for all the other speakers, is that we're not going to make you perch here for the next half an hour or hour. We're going to invite you to take a seat. And and then we'll put our speakers up and talk Q&A. But before you go, I'm just going to quiz you a little bit. You didn't mention Brexit in that presentation at all. Is it over? Is it done? Are you worried about it?
I don't think it's over. I think what's happening here is that it's about the new normal of our industry, and normal in our industry has actually changed, isn't it? And adaptation and flexibility and providing innovation. And whilst I think Brexit had a significant impact, I think to the credit of short sea shipping, the freight forwarders, the industry at large, the ports, we managed to navigate it pretty well. So I think we've diminished the impact of it to a large extent, but I still think it has a role. There's still an issue there that we must continue to be vigilant about. Yeah.
And could you also just comment on your net zero path? That was very clear. The shipping industry and the whole business of ports and harbours are generally regarded as being very conservative, very slow in relation to other sectors.
Yeah.
Having listened to Claudio and then listening to you, do you think that is actually the case, or do you think there's a real impetus coming in now on the zero emission?
No, I think shipping lines for some time have been working diligently to decarbonise, and I think it's very high on the agenda. I think it may be slow because there's a lot of things to change. Ship network, vessels. So there are a number of things that we can do, which is changing the bow structures of the vessels, looking at telerotation, onshoring of power. So when the vessels are in dock, they're not using the power. But a lot of that takes a lot of organisations, and a lot of links in the chains will also adapt at the same time. So it's not a question of being slow; it's a question of moving forward with the different players that are in this have to deliver it for us as well.
Yeah, and finally, could you just touch on consumers? You mentioned consumers in your presentation. Are you seeing serious consumer demand? I am not going to use you if you are not on a route to zero emissions.
I think what we're seeing is a lot more questions around what we're doing to reach a decarbonised position. And it's certainly high on the agenda. I wouldn't say we've seen a situation where people aren't using us. But there are still situations where people have the idea that they want to be involved with businesses that are lowering their emissions. However, there's still this constraint around they don't actually want to pay for it at the same time. So there's a conflict of interest with two opposing things. One is the cost, and one is actually what we're trying to do. And quite often, when you're trying to decarbonise, it is going to create costs. So that we see that through the levies that are being put on some of the ports. We see it through our own costs going up for having to retrofit the vessels, etc., etc. And that has to be paid for somewhere. So it's so there's a balance that has to be struck between the financial side of it and also what we all want and desire, which is a decarbonised future.
Brilliant. Roger, thank you very much indeed. You won't be surprised that there is a small gift, but this is the secret to zero emissions is in here.
Thank you very much.
Our next speaker now in this session is Mike Garrett, as you heard Roger say, who is chairman of MDS Transmodal. Forgive me. Mike, thank you very much indeed for coming to speak to us, and the floor is yours. Good luck with the clicker.
Yeah, I'm going to work this out. Right, well, good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here, and a privilege. I apologise to begin with. I'm going to throw quite a few graphs and numbers at you and so forth, so try and concentrate. I'd like to start by picking up on what Claudio's talked about in his speech, about the relative independence of the UK ports industry from government. The flip side of that is that government doesn't necessarily understand what ports and shipping can actually contribute. And so what I'm going to be talking about is really how that kind of connection can be made using the techniques which are already we use for government on road and rail. So here we go. This is what I'm going to try and cover. I'm going to try to establish the significance of short sea shipping on overall freight demand in Britain. examine what is changing, consider the opportunities and environmental benefits of these trends continuing, i.e. the market is already moving towards, I would say, more short sea, less short crossings. Describe how these benefits can be quantified based on the modelling appraisal techniques already used for other modes, and consider, therefore, how all this can be backed into the public interest. There's about 1.7 billion tonnes of goods lifted on and off road and rail in the UK each year, 18 billion HGV kilometres. 26% about 1.7 billion tonnes goes through the ports. The ports are therefore a major factor in the geography of freight and its impact on the wider society. Something like 39% of that port traffic is unit load. 2/3 of that, 65%, is short sea. So short sea unitized shipping, very important, has an impact, and it's worth taking into account in policy formation. And around 38% of that short sea traffic is in company trucks, and you can't put a company trucks on railway trains, so you have to think of other ways of dealing with the impact. And 62% of that short sea traffic is landed in the UK south of Ipswich, whereas most of the traffic is going north of Ipswich. I choose Ipswich for no particular reason. It's the 52nd parallel, and it was a convenient point on the map. That is the impact that short sea unitized traffic has on the road network. This is an assignment of all short sea traffic, all traffic between UK and the continent, assigned to the road network. I should say at this point, what I'm using here is our suite of modelling techniques and databases and so forth, which inform the GB freight model, which is used by government. And you can see the point of this graphic, an awful lot of traffic moving up the centre of the country, impacting on most regions. And that's why it's doing this. This is the distribution of major sheds, basically sheds of 100,000 square feet or more, of which there are a little over 2,000, and where they are. And you can see most of them, I apologise, from Ipswich and north of Ipswich. And this is a growing sector, so picking up again on what's just been said about just in time and just in case, we monitor warehousing development, and I think there's been something like a 15% increase in the total stock of the capacity, the floor space of big warehouses over the last 5 years. So that kind of buffer stock effect is quite profound. Hello, Brexit. So there's also a policy background reason, I think, to sort of take an interest at the moment. About 4 years ago, the National Infrastructure Commission guided the Department for Transport into forming a freight council chaired by a minister. I guess we have a speaker in the room who could talk about that. Network Rail has been consulting extensively on rail freight growth prospects. We're currently modelling long-term forecasts for rail freight tonnages. National Highways is engaged in studies to determine how road freight can best contribute to economic growth. It has an interest in carrying on building roads. It needs to understand why it should build roads and where it should build roads. And there's a whole range of other organisations in the public sector who are engaged in this kind of process, and particularly seeing the advantages that freight can bring to the case for infrastructure development. But freight, ports, shipping, and so forth is almost entirely within the private sector, and these benefits are difficult to articulate politically. So that's what I'm going to try and do and stick numbers on. Recent behaviour in the port sector. While the bogs have been generally in decline, and Claudia made that point about UK ports traffic overall has fallen. By contrast, unit loads continue to grow, and there's opportunities in value-added activities, distribution centres in the port estates, and so forth, which can all contribute to the kind of issues case we're making. What's been driving this change in behaviour recently? Scale, much larger container ships, more transshipment potentials, more filtering potentials. Brexit, the impact on GB exports to the continent, rising labour costs, accompanied trucking becoming less commercially attractive, diversion of Irish Sea land bridge traffic around Land's End, all of which are adding pressure on the ports to provide adequate buffer areas, which is all part of the impact of Brexit. COVID, disruption in supply chains, encouraging more warehousing, the point I've just been making. And climate change, there's pressure to decarbonise, which you've just been talking about, and of course it's important that the shipping industry gets engaged in that, and it is. And what I think this all does is it creates the opportunity to argue for new public policies which can help better connect the ports industry and therefore short sea shipping. What's been happening in the real market? I divided the country into 4 quarters: northwest, northeast, southeast, southwest. And I compared 2011 with 2021 and total trade between UK and EU countries, and that does include the Republic, of course, and how that's changed over that 10-year period. What we see is if we look at the 2 northern quarters, there's been growth, particularly in lowland, and if we look at the southern 2 quarters, we see basically stability, i.e. no growth. I've graphed that here, looking at northern ports versus southern ports. I apologise for the generalisation, but there was no other way I was going to be able to convey this in 15 minutes. And what we see, particularly over the last 5 years, is a significant increase in traffic through northern ports of this EU market. And we also see, if we look at this graphic, looking at unaccompanied trailers and Lolo together, we see how that has also been growing over recent years, and to a certain extent, particularly in the last 5 years, squeezing accompanied trucking. That was the demand side. We looked at the supply side as well. What capacity all these shipping lines that engage in these trades have been putting into the mix. Again, dividing the world up in Great Britain up into these 4 quarters. That's more difficult to interpret because of the heterogeneity of the services. So, apologies for forcing you to read this table. What we did was we looked at all the unit capacities of the various shipping services over this time period, 2012 through to 2022. And the short sea ships basically converted them into either 45-foot boxes or 13.6 metre trailers, so that at least they're on the same page, if you like, on the same table. And just for speed, look at the north and south lines in red. Reading across what happened in the northern ports, we see that capacity grew by 22%, demand by 25%, so there was a 4% reduction in the total number of sailings, so average boxes or units per ship went up by 30%. Do the same calculations for the southern ports, and you see almost exactly the same increase in capacity, but demand did not grow, as I just described in the previous tables. And in fact, if you look at loads per ship, i.e. cost competitiveness, that only grew by 15%, and there's a significant fall in the number of sailings. So what we see here is, I would suggest, a virtuous circle. in terms of longer crossings. Longer crossings effectively equals the northern ports. Which is not to say that this is going to, in the long run, mean less traffic for some ports, because we would still forecast growth. So it's a question really about where the growth goes, rather than robbing Peter to pay Paul. Now, how do we develop this case for the sake of government, if you like, for government agencies? This is the kind of basic background. There is a case for improved road capacity for regional distribution. There is a case for developing improved and more capacious rail links to distribution centres in the Golden Triangle, let's say. We should be reducing the need for long-haul road network capacity expansion. And to do this, I would argue, need to demonstrate the case on the basis of public interest. And the way government does this is to look at not just user benefits, but non-user benefits, i.e. reductions in emissions, reductions in congestion, and so forth. And this can be done through modelling. So this is our modelling approach, if you like. Lots of data can be brought onto the same page, if you like. There's road traffic data, there's rail freight flows data, there's port and waterborne freight statistics, there's UK trade data, there are shipping movements, there are transport costs. All of these data can be brought together. We bring them together in the freight model, and we employ this when asked for government agencies. The model produces origin destination tables on UK continent basis in the context of this paper. It produces network and shipping route assignments, and it calculates comparative benefit appraisals based upon official public interest values. And if you crunch all those numbers through, this is a very, very brief summary of all that. We compute about 10 million units a year in this market, loaded and empty, between the UK and the EU, carrying about 114 million tonnes. If you run that through the cost calculators, if you like, and you calibrate it on the basis that currently people do what is most sensible to do, the lowest cost solutions, you end up with the average unit costing so much on the EU inland leg, so much on the maritime leg, and so much on the UK inland leg. You can see the sums on the screen. The total user cost in this case is £1,042. If you required the whole of UK road activity to also cover the cost of non-user costs, all those public interest values that are taken into account when evaluating other modes of transport, you raise the cost level, of course, because you're forcing people to do not quite what they're doing at the moment. However, an extra £11. However, what you do is reduce non-user cost. So you end up with a net public interest saving per unit. You end up with a public interest saving of a substantial level. That is, this industry has a case to argue when discussing road and rail infrastructure. This is the impact that would have on the networks. It would reduce flows on a north-south basis. It would increase flows on only one major route, really, and that's the M62. No surprises there. That is what the north needs, more capacity on that axis. This is another table which shows the impact on different regions. All regions benefit, except for Yorkshire and Humberside, because of the extra traffic coming through the Humber ports as a consequence. So, in summary, Look at the statistics, and we find that unit road cargo is switching to northern ports, i.e. longer routes, and is switching towards unaccompanied modes. So that in itself encourages a planning policy and infrastructure investment to facilitate that. Brexit and COVID have been driving these trends. Warehousing capacity has generally been drifting north and expanding. Climate change and economic growth are major factors in the policy agenda. And Short Sea Shipping has the capacity to support that green agenda by switching to alternative fuels, as we're all well aware, the methanol fuel cells direction of travel. So expanding short sea services can address a wide range of policy objectives, reducing costs and demand for road space. And it is possible to demonstrate that to the public sector. There are practical challenges on how you identify charging systems to reflect those non-user costs. Road pricing is something that government has tended to shy away from. So there's the key challenge. How to articulate that case to public sector actors. Thank you for listening.
Phew, Mike, that was brilliant. I saw people taking photographs, so I should have said earlier. The presentations, assuming speakers are content, will all be made available on the Coastlink website after the event. So if you haven't quite caught item number 15 on that last slide, then it will be provided.
You only gave me 15 minutes.
I thought that was absolutely fascinating. Could you sort of look ahead 5 years? Because what I heard you say virtuous circle, and you showed that the actors, the private sector actors, are responding to market forces. There's a virtuous circle, and it's basically hitting what government would want to happen in terms of movement of stuff, reduction in emissions, and so on. Is my sort of sense of what you're saying. Am I right? And looking 5 years ahead, do you see this just getting better and better, or what are hiccups that might come in on the way?
Well, there'll be lots of people, different people in this room with different interests. So I've got to be really careful what I say. Yeah. What I was showing you there was what has happened in the last few years. And that's drawn directly from BFD statistics. It's simply that government doesn't necessarily draw lessons from the numbers it collects. As far as the future is concerned, you could say that this direction, once an industry starts changing, it's changing for good long-term reasons. So there must be some momentum here. This is as far as the industry has moved so far. And we are only just after Brexit. So although people were anticipating these changes, I really think that Delphi has to have the right to as it were, reply to some of this. So I think that's not going to be unfair. But it seems to me that this is a direction of travel, and it's for reasons which can be reasonably well understood. And I think that particularly applies to the reduced competitiveness of non-UK accompanied trucking into the UK. So, but I'm sure there will be other views. So I'm not.
And we can get those in questions. Thank you very much indeed, Mike. That was brilliant.
Thank you. Thank you.
And just on the subject of questions, ladies and gentlemen, I see that Pablo, I think, has been quite busy on Slido, so please do add to that. But as I said to you before, it's quite nice to have human interaction as well. So talking of human interaction, our next speaker is I'm now going to make a mess of his Michael Rosenkilde Lind, who is the Senior Commercial Manager for Port of Aalborg. Thank you very much indeed for coming to speak to us, Michael. It's very kind of you. The floor is yours. Let's dance around here.
Yeah, so first of all, welcome. Oh, sorry, welcome. So, thanks for the Coastlink for the invitation to come speak, and thanks for Greg and the chairman for trying to pronounce my name. So my name is Michael Rosenkilde-Lind. I'm a senior commercial manager at the Port of Aalborg, and I'm here to speak to you about the perspective from a port to try and develop a new segment. So Ro-Ro is a new segment for Port of Aalborg. It's something we're looking into. And it's more like the presentation is very honest about our findings, what we're looking into, but also the issues we're having about opening a new segment, a new route from Aalborg. So just for the few of you that doesn't know where Aalborg is placed in Europe, we're located in the northern part of Denmark. We are the biggest inland port in Denmark, the third largest port in Denmark. We have 4.1 million square meters, so we have a lot of space, and we're connected quite well to Norway and Sweden by other ports connected by ferries. Just put here. So yeah, capital, northern Denmark, fourth largest city. What we also have is a large concentration of building material manufacturers in this part of Denmark, who exports a lot of this cargo throughout Europe. Also, we are, as I mentioned, closely connected to Norway and Sweden, and at the port we also have a railway connection to the rest of Europe. Just a few things on the company. We have this 4 million tons cargo a year. About 1,000 calls for ships and 250 to 300 calls for railway. So we see railway really accelerating this year, or the last few years. And we see this as there is like a space in the market for us to be a connection through and from Southern Europe to the Scandinavian market. So this is outlay of the port and the area we have right now. So we are looking into to connect this to build this market for Ro-Ro. So we already have the terminals, we have the railway infrastructure, and we have the ramps and everything lined up at the port. So what we've been doing is trying to talk to different companies. How do we go about establishing this new cargo route? So what we found, and we're still in the very early stages of this, but what we found is that there is like difference, a big difference if you have a large production company. You have several, maybe one or two big companies willing to put in the risk, they have a guaranteed cargo volume. This is usually what the shipping line would like to have, is a guaranteed on a certain amount of volume being put into they're taking a big risk building a new route. So they will want some kind of guarantee. And large production companies can give that. They can give the certain volume. And the guarantees needed, and also they can give it for a certain amount of time. They can give either a 1, 2, or 3 year tender. So I'm not saying that's an easy way, but at least that's an easier way, because you can very quickly show where's the gains, where's the advantages, and it's very easy to calculate on loss and gains. So this is just a example of this, whereas the thing about this part of Denmark is we have a lot of production companies, but we don't have like one singular one. Yeah, and the ones we do have, they put everything on bulk carriers instead. So what we have instead is this segment. So we have a lot of small companies, a lot of small manufacturers. Everybody would like to see this. Everybody's looking for the next, like a greener solution. They can see both like import-export wise out of Denmark, but also domestically. It makes sense to make this a greener solution, to make Ro-Ro in Denmark. We're surrounded mostly by sea as well. But there's no guarantees. The small companies cannot give these guarantees. They put out their freight to to different forwarders. The forwarders have different opinions about some of them own lorries themselves. So there's a lot of you cannot get that commitment to build the route. And then again, there's the Incoterms, how the cargo is sold. So many smaller companies will not have anything, so they're selling it the cargo ex works. So they don't have any say about how the cargo is transported. So they say that they want to do this, but again, they don't want to take a risk of the transport. So we need to have the forwarders aligned to do this. But then again, there can be issues about forwarders and the shipping line. Do the shipping line wants to do the work the forwarders are doing as well? So there's like a lot of this issues about this gaining traction to collect the guaranteed volumes that you need. And then again, we have the road connection. So Denmark is quite well in the road connections. All the big islands are bridged. So there's like all these X factors coming in, and then so what we see is that we're trying to find out what is the total volume of the local manufacturers, import and export, and then I put in this in the bottom of the slide, this X factor, because we see a lot of cargo coming in and out of Norway and Sweden runs just past us, just past the port. The highway is just next to our terminal. And it's very hard to find the forwarders and find the importers and exporters. So we know the cargo is there. We know the volume of that is there. We know that the Norwegian government are really pressing manufacturers in Norway to go on a greener solution. So we know that the cargo is there, and we know that it will connect if the route is there. But it's very difficult to get any guarantees. And as a shipping line, they would like guarantees. They would need some kind of securement on the risk that they're taking. So what we did is we're a part of a big EU project called Aegis. Aegis is a very large EU project, but looking into intermodal short sea shipping in EU. And a part of this project, we're looking at the terminals. How can we lower cost of the terminal? What can we do in all kinds of ways? How about the movement from ship to rail and vice versa, and also looking into road. But what we're also looking into is cargo streams, and we've used quite a lot of years developing this system where we take cargo streams from the EU database to the Norwegian database and collect everything down to this interactive map. So I couldn't show you because of the time, but in general, it's an interactive map, and you can see on the left side here, we've chosen just the northern part of Denmark. It's a bit hard to see, but it's actually lined up. We've chosen the region of Northern Europe, and then on the right side, you can see where the cargo volumes move. So of course you can see the darkest color is of course the local markets. But here we can see all the import movements. We can see the average cargo tons and so on. And we can even go down and sell and see which kind of cargo is it. So if I check the next slide here, this is just an example. We go from northern Denmark, where we're located, and to southwest Sweden. Here we can see the movements: import 44,000, export 35. So that's directly between our two regions. But what we can also see is which kind of cargo is it. So we can start choosing, looking at the possibilities of each cargo movement and seeing how likable, how secure is it that they would make their movement on ship. Certain cargoes won't move on ship, certain is simply on lorries. But this is actually, we've made this to more like quantify and qualify our estimate that the cargo volume is there. And what we found is that we really have a lot of market potential, but it's very local. So for example, for UK at the moment, we can see it makes sense, but the cargo volumes is just so unsecure that it's actually more very, very local market, very short sea. So we're seeing the possibilities of the Sweden coast, the southern Norwegian coast, and then actually domestic. So you can see the one marker is to Copenhagen. So what we see is that it's actually the biggest market we have is domestic. It's the biggest potential. And what our biggest adversary in this case is, of course, road transportation. But there is legislation coming in. So this is all also bridge. So there is a toll on going over the bridge. So there is like movements in the direction that it makes perfectly sense to have a route between Sweden, Copenhagen, and Aalborg. And the big X factor in this is really the railway. So the intermodal transportation of moving cargo coming down from Norway directly to rail and then going down in Europe and vice versa the other way around. It's just very hard to get these cargo volumes confirmed because there's so many people involved, like importers, exporters, transporters, and then again railway connections. We need to have that aligned again. So at the moment we can see the volumes are there, and we can show it by data, everything. But it's hard to build the case for a guarantee, but it's getting better. Legislation is working in our direction. Tolls on the bridge are getting higher. Legislation on higher taxes or tolls on trucks are assisting us. More focus from manufacturers to lower the emission, especially on this third part logistics. So how are your cargo transported? I'll round it up a bit. So the conclusions, as I've mentioned, that we can see the data and statistics confirm the cargo flows. We can see it's there, and we already have the infrastructure, so it doesn't really take that big of an investment from the port side or from the forwarder side. But it will be like this, collecting the cargo volumes for all kind of different players in the market, and not all of them are even located in our region. So they may be located in Southern Europe and so on. So that's really the key. And then we firmly believe that this transit cargo and the possibilities of moving cargo directly from sea to rail and connecting you to EU or the rest of Europe will really be a key factor and will be a perfect selling point once the route gets started. And again, as I mentioned, the legislation is helping us. The business case just keep getting better. But at the end of the day, as I've mentioned here, everybody will need to take a risk. And we as a port, we're a limited port, and we are willing to take a fair amount of risk. But coming to the transport part, like on the shipping side, there will be the need of a shipping line being willing to take some kind of risk, a calculated risk, and we can see the volumes, but it will be a risk because you need to build up a route, especially also if you need to connect with other ports as well. So we're hoping to find a shipping line that's willing to take some kind of risk with us. But this is really our issue right now. But as I mentioned, the business case keeps getting better and better. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, I thought it was fascinating, Mike. I'm about to ask you a question. Just to get the sequencing right, please, if our previous speakers, Claudio, Roger and Mike, come and take a seat on these very uncomfortable chairs here. And whilst they're doing that, Michael, I thought it was fascinating. So basically, you're saying digitization, modern data sets means you can work out what the flows are, and therefore you can see potential business cases. But the issue, it sounds to me, is the human beings.
Yeah.
Can you talk about what sort of forums, what sort of meetings, what sort of functions have you been putting together to talk to those human beings? How are you going to find that shipping line that you referred to?
Yeah, so we are in direct contact with many of the shipping lines, and then through the Aegis project, we're looking at even lowering the cost and talking to the shipping line about what can we provide for them, what kind of guarantees can we have. But then again, we are really doing the grunt work about just going out to all the manufacturers, getting it mapped, seeing how is your cargo flow, and especially how is it in Incoterms? Do you sell at X Works, or do you have any kind of say in the transport? Because everybody can see it, and everybody wants to put it in their green, what do you call it, green.
The agenda.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And report it. So we're really like mapping everything now and getting confirmed from all the manufacturers. Yeah.
Cool. And what's your level of confidence you're going to get one?
Yeah, it's pretty good. It's looking good because legislation is, and everybody's moving in that direction. So we saw from the previous slide, this about the emission on rail and sea, and it's the only way around it. And also I reckon it's the same in the UK as in Denmark. It's difficult to get lorry drivers. So this unaccompanied, that you have lorry drivers only driving to the port, and then unaccompanied sailing to the next port, and then only having it makes sense. So.
Brilliant. So in here is the key for the Rolls Royce that you're going to buy. Well done, Michael. So, ladies and gentlemen, you see Slido and Pablo Rodas Martini's been busy at it during the course of the sessions, but we're all human beings. So I'm going to use one of Pablo's questions to start. I'm going to use the top one because I think it's an interesting one, where he reflects on the fact the EU has established that major 10T ports must have the ability to cold bunker. Who's the best person to answer that one? Perhaps we'll start with Claudia. Claudia, what's your view on shore power and the provision of it? And there's a real energy issue here, isn't it?
Yeah. So I think we're looking at it across our network, and there are a number of challenges. So interestingly, the DAT has muted potentially a similar approach in the UK, and I think. Taking this approach, we're only getting half of the answer. Mandating that ports have to provide the infrastructure doesn't create the demand. Doesn't create the demand, and I think at the moment, there isn't enough focus on on the end-to-end piece. So how do we develop a standard, for example, that shipping lines, can look at whether in their new builds or retrofits, et cetera, et cetera. The other challenge we've got across the UK ports is that if the demand is created, we'll go and put the investment in, but we need the parallel investment into the UK energy infrastructure coming into the ports, and that's often where the biggest elements of the cost is. But right now, the British government policy is to facilitate some of the innovation and the investment through grants, rather than a clear and robust. This is the way you're all going to go, both as port providers and as as shipping lines.
Thank you. Any reflections on that from the floor? Any reflections? Yes, ma'am. You'll need a microphone. Have you got one? There we go. Excuse me.
Margaret Llewellyn, Peel Ports. I've just attended the cruise conference in Fort Lauderdale, the international one. There's been much debate about onshore power, and they came to the conclusion that it's all very well governments coming up with their own requirements, but until the shipping lines are happy to be able to do, it is better for all the lines to understand what they want, and then to go back to the governments and say, this is the type of operation we want, rather than the other way round, where it's done piecemeal with all different types of approaches to it. The second thing is, as you mentioned, the issue is in the UK that if we have onshore power that uses the grid, we have very serious issues with the grid in some parts of the UK.
Interesting. Roger, perhaps you'd like to comment on that? Have you got an observation on that from a shipping operator perspective?
I think, as we said before, I mean, this is there's no one straightforward answer. It's quite a complicated subject. There's a number of players involved in this, and each of those players have to come to a concise agreement across the platform to come up, to have the solution. So I agree that mandates from government to say do one thing is not going to be the right thing that fits for everybody. We have to work hand in hand with the port operators, both in this country and the ports that we operate throughout Europe. The second issue to this as well, onshore power is one solution. There's also the concept of power packs on the vessels. So when the vessels actually berth, they're actually operating under their own power packs as well. So we're not putting the onus purely on the port side. So I think this has some way to run, and there's going to be different concepts will come out, and it may be that there will not be one shoe fits all approach. That different lines or different vessels will have a slightly different approach to accommodate what they need at that time. And obviously, as we move into the future, new builds will also be better equipped to deal with our demands of the future, as opposed to what we've got today, which is some of the retrofitted vessels and different mechanisms. So it's not a straightforward. There's no one answer to this, and it's not a straightforward solution. So I think it goes back to what we said before. It's a little bit more complicated than simply saying there's one answer to it and only one party at the shipping line, the port, or someone else can solve it. We have to do it across the board.
And Michael, is this reflected in Aalborg, in your plans as you've been developing this new route idea?
Yeah, so the port is we also receive cruise vessels. So it's actually quite an interesting discussion. And shore power is really being discussed, especially I reckon it's most Europe, but also in Denmark anyway. And we're looking at the point of view that, so we have 30 calls a year, 25 cruise calls a year. But as I mentioned in my slide, we have 1,000 cargo vessels a year. So we're looking into that shore power is for the cargo vessels. Where it makes sense. Where do you gain the most environmental effects for the bucks you're paying? So we're looking into, especially for our container-wise, you see the routes where you have a fixed amount of calls, but also for our cranes, electrifying cranes and so on. So we're looking into that part anyway.
I think it's really interesting because your point is really interesting, man, because I was listening to a lady who operates a ferry company, the Isle of Wight. It's got to work out which one. And she was bemoaning the fact that they want to go to new vessels and they want to go all electric, but they can't get regional government to understand the need to provide power to the port. So they're going down the diesel route. And so it makes me wonder whether we've got the right forums. Where it almost feels like I'll kick this, and how do we get people into the right forum? It's a human problem. It's not a technical problem, is it?
And the thing is, it's for the whole country. So it's all very well, we have over 200 ports in the country. Obviously, a lot of them are very small, but if you're going to actually advise on saying that this is what you've got to do, the whole grid system will collapse in many parts of the UK. So fundamentally, they have to decide on systems that are appropriate for the grid that we have. And so you're right, there needs to be a full discussion, and then to pick up on which types of operators are going for transition energy and then moving on to more sophisticated energy. And so there's that whole area as well, particularly in ferries and in container ships.
It's really interesting, and this is something perhaps we'll pick up in the workshop tomorrow afternoon, and as a record. Is there any comment from anybody operating in European ports or European shipping lines on this, where you think you're ahead of the game? Sir?
I won't say we're ahead of the game. We're working with it. Sean Potter, the FDS. I completely agree with Roger. There are so many variables in the marketplace. The energy isn't mature enough for us to look at how do we transition. We're working on ammonia, e-methanol, electric, biofuels as some examples of tests and new builds that we're progressing. To put a ship into service costs significant millions. You can't do it overnight, so there's going to be a transition. We are looking at new builds with ammonia as an example, maybe 2025, 2026. But at this minute in time, it's all about biofuels and how we transition towards that, whilst we wait for the maturity and the infrastructure in ports also to come forward. Because that's another challenge.
Yeah.
Because if we want to look at hydrogen and where we go with hydrogen, for one of our ships to run today, a production in Sweden that we know about and have been looking at, we can take a full year's worth of production and it'll do one sailing. That's the challenge.
Fascinating. Anybody else on the floor want to comment on this? We can spend quite a long time down here. Mike Garrett's sitting there thinking he's not been asked a question yet. So I'm just getting Pablo very kindly running this Q&A session for us. He gets a round of applause at the end. Mike, just to change the subject slightly and move on to this issue of the inland navigation share of the GB market, which is there. It's very modest, is it not, in the UK?
Sorry, the answer is it's very small. I'll declare an interest here. I'm president of the Commercial Boat Operators Association. This is a very small industry. And although there's a fair amount of inland navigation of coasters into waterways, such as up the Humber and up the Trent to the likes of Gould, as far as pure inland to inland barge traffic is concerned, it's very small. That hasn't been helped by a lack of interest in developing waterways, which, because the waterways is basically the responsibility of a leisure organisation, Canal River Trust. So it isn't that things couldn't be done, and I've seen some significant failures from the point of view of interaction between CRT and planning and so forth, planning authorities. But at the moment, not extensive. I'll deal with the one at the bottom as well. If you
I was going to say, why don't you go straight into the last question, please?
There is a distortion here, of course, in that the railway industry in the UK does get grants for operating trains which are apparently not otherwise viable. The Motorship Revenue Support Grant. And it's sort of available to shipping, but in practice not. And it's also potentially quite distorting. It will be extremely difficult to introduce and not distort, basically distort the market, because it can't be so easily defined, because the other end of it is outside the UK very often. So I think the answer to that question is by understanding how the promotion or the support of ports and their own inland connections can be improved is the main key to this. So that ports can become distribution hubs, much more effective distribution hubs. Otherwise, I think it would be quite difficult to define a grant system. I mean, we've worked on this in the rail sector, and it's not a wonderful thing to enter.
Well, that's encouraging.
No, seriously. Look, that's my point of my paper was really that the benefits of short sea shipping can be translated into inland infrastructure improvements and planning and planning approaches within the UK. And that, I think, is the better way to go.
Thank you. Michael, as you listen to this quite heavy UK-oriented debate, no, not at all, because you've given us some fascinating stuff. Do you feel lucky that you're in Denmark and that the Danish government is giving exactly the sort of support you need to grow coastal shipping?
At least from port side, we see that the shore power plants being built in Denmark is also being partly funded by the municipalities. So there's a big pressure from the city to have this shore power. Many ports are located directly at the city centers, and they are actually adding or paying a part of the bill of the shore power. So that makes the business case better. It's still a difficult case to build, especially on the cruise ships, because of the size of the plants, the investment, right? But you do see that there is part funding, also EU funding as well. So there's that. It makes the business case a bit easier.
ability.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm not going to let Claudio escape. And you're the top of the shop, and you're clearly interfaced with local and national government. Do you think is it a fractious relationship? Is it a positive relationship? You said that you felt it sort of deregulated, which I thought was very encouraging. Do you feel there's one particular thing that could be done to unlock this?
In terms of what, shore power? Or?
It was more around this issue of what single thing could government do to encourage
So I would actually draw some of the stats that were in Roger and Mike's presentation, which kind of give me the answer. I think if you look at, Roger had a slide that showed shipping generates, I think, a quarter of the CO2 of rail per kilometre and a sixth or an eighth of CO2 of road transport. Mike had some stats up there that showed roughly, but I'll misquote the numbers, but roughly 2/3 of the cargo comes into the southern ports and 2/3 of the population is nearer to the northern ports. So from a market perspective, the answer is pretty clear where those cargoes should go if the environmental impact is the primary driver. For me, therefore, the work that the government has to do has to be all around the landside transportation piece, whether it's port connectivity, whether it's and some of this stuff is going to be unpopular, right? I was at in the building, 3 buildings up with the city region and the DFT a couple of months back. We're talking about the need for an integrated road transport solution in the north. It doesn't win any votes. Cutting empty passenger services, loses your votes. Bringing in road pricing loses your votes. But these are absolutely the right things to be doing if reducing CO2 of road transportation is the priority. So for me, the key thing government has to get its mind around is whether it's prepared to do some of the unpopular stuff to drive the violence.
That's fascinating. So there's a public information campaign in there as well. How do we get the public to understand it? Any comments on this part of the debate from the floor, please? Any reflections from you? Yes, sir. Microphone just coming. Just behind you.
Hi there, Jeff Lippitt from PD Ports. A comment actually to really support what Claudio said and what Mike said around coastal shipping. I think one of the issues actually is that from a government perspective, coastal shipping is not looked at in the same vein as rail and used as a corridor up and down our coast. So coastal shipping could be used to drive the most green environmental routes over quite long distances. The UK is long and thin. Transpennines are holy grail for a lot of us, but actually you could take a lot of rail and road movements away by moving, first of all, cargo to the north, which has been proven in the last 10 years. The next bit is to move further up and down the coast with coastal shipping, but the grant mechanism, which could allow you to do that, is not as mature and well supported through DFT as it is through MSRS, and that's one of the constraints. To be fair to DFT, they are committed to looking at it, but those are long-term windows, and it takes a lot of time to move those wheels in government, especially when there's changing policies and government priorities.
Thank you. Really interesting. So that actually brings up the issue of green shipping corridor, which Anonymous has asked a question about green shipping corridors. Any comments on that? Perhaps we go to Roger, that you're thinking on green shipping corridors, and we might take a view from Mike Garrett after. Sure.
Well, I think we are providing green shipping corridors, just not within the UK itself. And one of the challenges particularly in the short sea, is that we're generally dealing with customers and market demand, which is, as I alluded to in my presentation, which is based on speed, reliability, quick transit. These are often goods which are moving directly into a warehousing situation or going directly to the shelf in the market. So to slow down the transit time by using a canal, in this case, which is mentioned, is not really the optimal way to do it. Now, I think that, again, as we transition forward, as we take out, sort of the dirty fuels of road, shorter rail journeys, these are the methods which will, sort of promote, a greener environment. And whilst I'd love to see, sort of barges in the UK used as the way out on the continent, I just don't think it's feasible, and the cost of upgrade our canal system would be such a, at such a level that there wouldn't be the investment to do it. So that investment then has to go into the greener side of the trucking, the rail systems, so the moving of the warehouses close to the port, and that final mile delivery. So, and again, sort of come back to the same view on this, but it has to be across everybody to do this. So, I'd love to see it, but I just don't think sort of long term that the canal system in the UK is going to be invested and developed, particularly in the short sea market anyway.
Thank you. And Mike, a view on green shipping corridor?
I tend to agree with that. I think the emissions trading system might have an impact at some point. It depends what the price of carbon is, so to speak. But and there will be cargoes which can move more slowly. But generally, I think I would agree with that. And insofar as rail is concerned, the key is to improve asset productivity, better pathing, as you say, higher speeds also means the assets get used more intensively, so the costs come down. So that's another kind of way of looking at things.
Thank you. We're just coming towards the end now. I'm just the final question for Roger. Do you think there is a risk of short sea shipping companies being subject to M&A activity by the big boys?
Well, I think they are already, and I think that's pretty evident in the marketplace. But I think the more relevant question is, what do short sea shipping companies actually sort of bring to the table? And for coming like wet lines, whilst a large percentage of our cargo is local cargo, in other words, it's we're working with the customers end to end. We also provide services for third party, and we also feeder for shipping lines as well, for other shipping lines, like the ones mentioned on the question. So, sort of that in itself provides a better operation for the shipping lines, because we are moving other containers, whether they be laden or empty, because, generally shipping lines have empty repositioning as well. So if we could reposition, 100 containers on the vessel out for somebody else, then, rather than rail it or road it down to a southern port or somewhere else, then of course we're providing a greener solution. So I think you have to look at what the benefits are to specialised shipping lines like wet lines, their accessibility to the other ports rather than the general ports, and it's something that we're actively involved in today.
Brilliant. Thank you all very much. Thank you, gentlemen. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to close now for a coffee break. I'd like us please to express our gratitude to our panel and to Pablo and Anonymous for some excellent questions. Thank you all very much indeed. And you see the timing's gone out of the window. I have a cunning plan. Please reconvene here at 11:20.